Hey everyone, today I'm creating these super bright orange, yellow, green and black cards using the Kendra's Card Challenge number 9. Now all of the details will be linked down below so that you can go to Kendra's site and download the challenge. It runs for the first quarter of 2023 and basically you select 6 sheets of 6x6 paper and you cut it per the design. I've picked Brutus Monroe Baked Fresh. And you then create 15 cards with a different layout. Now I'm just showing you here some of the papers in this pack, and I did find this pack and the way it's advertised a little bit confusing because it says on the front that there's 12 designs and there's 2 of each, but everything is double-sided. So there's actually 12 designs, but there's 4 of each because of the double-sided. This did make it really easy to pick my 6 pieces of pattern paper though, so I will highly recommend these patterns. So you can see here I've already cut things up per the design. I just lay out 15 blank card bases and then put them onto cards 1 through 15. And for each of these designs, I have actually included a craft backing panel of 5 1/4 by 4 inches. It just means there's not so much white space, so I do this quite frequently. But I did notice in this card challenge, it actually called for it in the design. So I ran through and added those to each one. I'm now just sitting here. It might look quite awkward, but I'm sitting here with my trimmer on top of all of the cards and running through each of the card layouts, creating the additional elements. Quite a few of them do ask you to do matting layers or to add extra pieces in a contrasting colour. And in each of these cards I use a different one. So maybe I use some black or I use some white, or in some instances I do use a 7th sheet of the pattern paper. So I'm just topping it up where I think that there's something that maybe I'd rather have a pattern paper there instead, or there's not a lot of elements on the card. So I really just go with my gut. For this here, you can see that originally the little flag was in pattern paper, but because I decided to turn the rectangle into pattern paper, I did the black so that it was a much better contrast. For a lot of the sentiments, I ended up using circle happy birthdays. These were left over from a previous project, and I'll put a link here to the video where I show my hack for creating bulk circle sentiments. And so a lot of the designs did ask for it, but also I just wanted to use what I had, and I was trying to avoid needing to stamp out anything specific for this project. I had packed some of my supplies away over the holidays, and getting them all out was a bit of a pain. So I was trying to do this with minimal supplies. The other thing worth mentioning is often I will use ephemera packs or leftover dies or something in my stash that I wanted to use up. But again, because I had packed quite a few things away, they weren't easy to get to. And with this pattern paper, it was so bright and it was so shiny and impactful. I love Brutus Monroe. Brutus Monroe and Paper Rose have that same shiny texture. I decided to try and create some minimalist cards, so I'm not adding a lot of detail to these. Through this process, I'm literally just going card by card design. And it's at this point where if there's something a little bit unusual in the recommended layout, that I'm adjusting the design. And then after I've completed this step, which is literally adding and piling onto these 15 cards, I will then go through and pile them all up and I'll work card by card and finish it completely. So what this means is if I skip anything at this stage, I'll tidy it up at the final section. But really what I'm trying to do here is do as much as possible so that I'm just doing the card assembly last. I did want to give a huge shout out and say thank you for all the support with my videos. I did reach a bit of a milestone last week, which was I hit 2,000 subscribers. So thank you to everyone who has subscribed. I do really appreciate the ongoing support. I also love comments below as well. You might notice that I answer or comment on everything that people put below my videos in the comments section. So if there's any questions you've got for me, any videos that you would like to see, any feedback, then please definitely do drop a note below because I do read all of those. There's quite a few little banners in these card layouts and they do add quite a bit of interest to the cards, especially since I'm not adding a lot of embellishments. The other thing I did decide to do this time that you won't see me do very often is I've actually added quite a few of the little circles. So there's like little circle embellishments. You can see them on the left of card layout number 13 and on the right of card 15. on the card sketches at the top of the screen. I had a few of these in my stash. I didn't end up using the little bling stickers. I just used these slightly bigger circles, and I've added them to some random cards throughout the layouts. Okay, moving on to card number 1, I've put the original sketch up in the right-hand corner, and you can see the number of the card sketch in the top left. So I have these 2 pattern papers that work really nicely together as the hero of this card. And then I have some really, really simple circles that I just mentioned that I'm popping in the top right-hand corner. And then there was a big rectangle that you were supposed to decorate the card with. And instead of finding something like that and stamping out a sentiment, I used a sentiment that I already had in my stash. So you can see here that I've just got this really small happy birthday sentiment, and I do have loads of those. I've got a little container that has probably hundreds of them in it, and I just grabbed one and I'm going to attach it to the front of the card. Very, very simple card, but really does highlight the pattern papers. Possibly a design that I would use again. The black lines are a little bit fiddly, but I think it adds a bit of interest. That's card number 1. For card number 2, it did have this big giant banner, and I don't know why, but I just looked at it and I didn't create it. So I just wanted to put something up in that top corner that was going to have a little bit of interest. And you know what? I think actually because I print things in black and white, it was a little hard to read things on the sketch. So I went a little bit rogue and I used some spare paper to create a 2x3 rectangle. I added one of those little happy birthday messages, and it looks quite different to the sketch, but I like card number 2. For card number 3, this one has quite a few elements and quite a bit of layering. And you'll notice that in the actual sketch, it does indicate that the paper is supposed to be white and then the backing layer is supposed to be a color. Again, I used a 2x3 of pattern paper on this instead. And again, it was for exactly the same reason. If I had had a bunch of my stamping supplies out and available, I could have stamped something interesting on that 2x3, but I didn't. So instead I supplemented it with some pattern paper. And I did find that made these quite quick to create because I wasn't swapping between different mediums. So stamping versus chopping versus assembling the cards. So for these ones, I've just put this strip straight through the middle, which is true to the design. And then I've added just 2 of these little circles because mine were bigger than the sketch. And this layout, it is exactly the same as on the card sketch. It's just the way that I've used the pattern papers that is slightly different. By the way, I have put some links below to all of the materials that I have used. So if you're looking for this pattern paper or some other supplies that I've used, you can get to those very easily from the links below. I'd love to know which of these card sketches is your favorite. For me, I often find 3 or 4 of them that I really enjoy and I use them again. This might be one of them, I think. For card sketch number 4, I did change this one up quite a little bit. You can see on the sketch that it has a circle and then it has a smaller little banner for the sentiment. Because I'm really using these circle sentiments, it was perfect because there was a spot right there that I could put it. But for the banner at the bottom, I was in 2 minds about how to approach it. And in the end, I decided to just leave that element off the card completely. So I'm just lining up these 2 rectangles at the back. And then to add a little bit more interest, I cut the black panel in half and split it so there's 2 lines. So the element is missing, but I adjusted one of the elements that was already there just to make the card look a little bit more interesting. It just looked a little bit lost. The other thing is you can see here, I made a choice about where to put the sentiment and it's in a slightly different place than the circle on the sketch. For sketch number 5, this is a very similar design to ones that I've used when I've created cards without a sketch. But one thing I'm noticing is I have a giant supply of 1.5 inch strips of pattern paper. They were from a project many years ago and I have tried to use them up over time. But with this sketch here, the thing I'm noticing is this strip of pattern paper is quite a bit wider. I think it's 2.5 inches. And so for me, when you lay this out, it covers up a significant portion of the card. And then with that square, again, I used a spare piece of paper rather than a white square. This is a really cool design. So I have a lot of 12 by 12 paper that I think would be perfect for that one. Okay, on to card number 6. So this one is a very simple design, and one of the first things that I did was with those banners on the right hand side of the center panel, they seem to me to be very disparate. So one really, really long going all the way down the edge, and then one quite a bit shorter. So I just trimmed off probably, I don't know, maybe half an inch, quarter of an inch, probably quarter of an inch off the one on the right hand side, and it just meant it sat up a little bit further on the panel, which I just liked a little bit more. Tiny change. The other thing I did was, again, I used a sentiment that I already had stamped and I matted it in black so that I could add it to the white rectangle. This is not a choice I would normally make, but again, I was doing this without trying to stamp anything new, so I was winging it completely. I think it worked out well in the end, but probably not a deliberate choice that I would make if I had all of my supplies readily available. The other thing I've done is, you can see there's a black strip right here behind the rectangle. I attached that to the card and then I offset the white rectangle just so that it was a little bit balanced. For card sketch number 7, it has these waves through the middle. I'm sure that there is a really easy way to do that, but I decided not to. So I had the 2 pieces of pattern paper and I just lined them up as I needed to across the bottom and the top of my 5 1/4 by 4, and it left a nice strip through the middle. Now you can just see the craft paper coming through, and I decided just to leave it. I could have lined up some black or some contrasting colors across the top and the bottom, but in the end I decided to do my other trick and do just a couple of pieces of vertical, and I've got one in a slightly thicker paper than the other. These were just scraps that were on my desk, and I decided that I would line them up so that there was something that was a little bit more interesting behind the circle happy birthday. So think of it as I put some vertical lines instead of some horizontal lines to keep that same level of interest on the card. You might notice that I did accidentally spin the card upside down, which means instead of having the big piece at the top, it's the other way. I rolled with it in the end and I added an extra couple of black dots, and I guess that is my version of card number 7. On to card number 8. So this one has it's got 6 sides, so I guess a flat hexagon in the middle. I don't have any dies that are that shape, and I was a bit lazy, so I didn't bother cutting anything out. So again, I've used my fallback, which is a rectangle. You will see me fall back to rectangles if there's unusual shapes, especially if there's ovals. So I don't have any oval dies, and so I just adjust the cards to work with what I have. So here I've got some layers, and I'm putting the 2 pieces of pattern paper on the end of this strip. This is per the original design, so right here I'm following everything that I am supposed to. And then in the middle I've got this big piece of white, and as I've mentioned before, the pieces of white were not my friend. I was really struggling to find sentiments or things that I could attach to these cards to finish them off. And I managed to find in my stash some of my hot foiling sentiments that were gold on black. Now, I only had 2 of these left, and I used both of them in this project, but they were absolutely perfect because they blended in with the color combinations of the existing pattern paper. So sometimes it just works out. For card number 9, this is a really great example of where the planning that I did originally when I was cutting up the elements and putting them on top of the card base. Here you can see in the sketch, the main backing panel here is white, and then there's dark mats on each of the elements. For me, I actually did it in reverse. I am not exactly sure why, but I suspect it was possibly because I mat things in white wherever I possibly can, because I've got a whole ton of pretty heavy white cardstock that was super cheap, and it just means that it's so simple to do the layering, and the contrast stands out really nicely on even just the craft. And because I often put a matting layer, there are lots in these sketches already, but because I always do that, I'm just kind of used to making the backing layer a color that's going to contrast to the white. So for this sketch here, this is number 9, I am really using my grid mat to line up that happy birthday. If it's wonky, it would really stand out. For card number 10, this one in the card sketch, you can see that there's 2 pieces of pattern paper and a gap between. I line things up from the outside and make sure that my border is straight, but when I did it, I didn't actually end up with that gap. I don't know if I made a mistake with my measuring, but it meant that where the two pattern papers met was a little bit awkward. So again, my trick of some spare black cardstock, it didn't go all the way from top to bottom because I didn't have a piece that long, but it was enough to separate those two pattern papers and make them not look awkward because they slightly misjoined. So this is a very impromptu, slightly adjusted card number 10. For card number 11, this one I did add some extra mats. These two pieces of pattern paper were intended to kind of float on top of the black, but for me it just looked a little bit awkward, so I added a little bit more interest by matting it in the craft, and then I attached these to the black panel, and it just filled it up a little bit more and addressed, I guess, some of the challenges I had with the spacing. Rather than space everything perfectly, I did the same space from the top and the bottom, and then if the middle wasn't exactly the same, at least it was symmetrical, and then I didn't have to worry about 3 different gaps being identical. So that's a little bit of a hack for how to do some of these adding of strips if you want it to look balanced without having to measure everything super perfectly. This might be a great way to use up some of my paper scraps, those 1 1/4 inch strips that I mentioned earlier, just by doing a double row. This would also be great for card kits, honestly. For card number 12, this one does not have matting layers, so slightly different card layout, and I did follow the sketch. I did trim it out of the video here, but behind that top layer, I ended up putting a spare piece of cardstock on the right-hand side, just so that it doesn't have a noticeable dip. But everything else is pretty true to the sketch. I managed to find a little wooden heart in my stash. It's not the same scale, but it is definitely the intent of the sketch. So card number 12 is quite true to design. If you're enjoying the video, it'd be great if you could hit the like button. Thank you. All right, on to sketch number 13. So this one has 2 pieces of pattern paper next to each other, which I think is always a risk. I did look at both sides and make a choice about which ones I was going to put next to each other, and then also which ones would be best balanced by this little banner that I've got in the top of the rectangle. In the end, I chose to put the one that had some green on the left with the orange, and then the little banner has quite a bit of green in it. It's a subtle thing, but I often do that where I make a choice about which side of the paper I'm going to use if it doesn't look perfect from the beginning. That is card 13. For card number 14 and 15, these are exactly the same, but they have the pattern paper and the black inverted. I didn't add string. There is intended to be some string with a bow in the middle. I prefer very plain cards, so I decided not to actually do that. And I've just used, again, my happy birthday. The way that the papers lined up, they met really well. I must have done some very straight cutting, so I didn't need to do anything to split up the 2 papers. I wanted to give a huge shout out to Kendra at Cards by Kendra. There is a link below to how you can get these sketches. I can only imagine how much work it takes to pull these together, and I personally absolutely love doing the challenges every quarter. If you are on the fence, I highly encourage you to give it a go. You can see that I've changed a bunch of the sketches to work for me, and you can do the same. I've put a link here to a playlist of all of my Kendra's card challenges if you were looking for some binge watching. Have a great day.